Fine, thanks. How are you?
Alive and grateful. Thanks for joining. Let's
Yes,
let's look forward to a great time. Hope you're well.
I'm well, thank you. Yes, blessed, staying safe.
Lovely. Good to
Yes,
hear. No, always a delight to catch up with you, eh?
yeah, and not among Gazy's meetings on your own.
Indeed, indeed. It'll be nice for us to catch up at a private time also. Hopefully, and then see how we can make our continent a better place through
Certainly.
collaborations, eh?
Well, I've decided to make the continent a better place by working with medical professionals.
Lovely,
Yes.
lovely, lovely. Okay, great.
So working in that and making sure that they are resilient and that we change the system to support their resilience, but and that we don't have burnout, them leaving the profession and committing suicide.
Amazing. I guess that's one of the things we should talk about at a later time. The African Institute of the Mind actually is keen to assist us as Africans to mind our minds, which is one of the reasons why we host this on a monthly basis. So I'm just going to switch us right now to the session with Charles. Thanks again for joining. It's a great day, as I always like to say. Greetings from Rainbow Nation, South Africa, where I am privileged to be joining you from wherever it is around the world you'll be watching this. As those of you who possibly know, African Institute of the Mind is an institute that I founded 3 years ago with an intention to help Africans mind our minds, one mind at a time. It is humbling, exciting, and I don't know if I can contain my excitement, guys. The reality about life is you just need to keep dreaming and do the dream. I think it's okay for me to express my excitement, guys. The gentleman who is on the other side of the screen is a distinguished leader that I have only had the privilege to connect with today. And this recording is very special because for us Africans, today is actually referred to as Africa Day by the African Union. So it is very special in various levels and in various spaces and places. And I'm delighted and humbled, honored, grateful to have with us Charles Morris. And Charles Morris has two roles, if you may. He's Director of Global Learning and Development for Microsoft. And he's also, the creator and lead of Microsoft's mindfulness and mindful growth program, which he created. I'd like to also say that every time you get the opportunity to meet a leader, I think one of the things that you look out for is what they embody. I haven't spent a lot of time with Charles, but he truly embodies what he represents as a leading leader of a global brand like Microsoft. And I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to you, Charles, for honoring us at the Distressival, the Festival of Stress Reduction. Thank you so much, Charles, for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Joshua, and hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. Real honor.
Right. So, Charles, let's jump straight. And if you may, I mean, I just talked a little bit about your work and leadership at Microsoft from a learning and development perspective. Aside the Mindful Growth program that you created at Microsoft, you want to help us learn more, or if you may, unpack that for us, so we know more about you and the work you do at Microsoft. Please, Charles, please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said earlier about just chasing the dream, because I think the first thing I would say is that I had no idea that I would be doing this. My training back in my undergraduate days was in computer science. I actually spent a huge amount of time, 15 plus years, in Microsoft's software engineering divisions, working on some of its largest products, some of which are not around anymore, like Windows Phone. I don't know if it made it to Africa or not. I think it actually had some market share there. Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, our web browsing. But what happened was, throughout much of that period while I was an engineering leader, I had something that kept me going in such a high-paced, stressful environment like Microsoft, was mindfulness. And for many of those years, it was a secret. I didn't tell anyone. People just asked me, how do you stay so calm? How do you, et cetera. And, of course, if they asked the right questions, I would share, but I wasn't very open about it. And then what happened is I think the environment changed. Just generally speaking, I think the mindfulness movement has emerged to a point where it's well accepted. The science behind it is accepted. It's on the cover of Time magazine. And so it's in the popular culture to a certain extent. And it also is being used more and more in corporate environments. And then more locally at Microsoft, we had a big change of leadership, as you may know, about 6 or 7 years ago now with Satya Nadella. And what he did was he brought a much more human-centered approach to leadership. He talked about things like our personal purpose, like developing empathy. And so the conditions at Microsoft changed such that I basically started to ask, wow, maybe it's time for me to share my secret. And that's what led me to create Mindful Growth, as you said. And eventually that's what led me out of an engineering role and into now a learning and development role in HR, and doing the work that I do.
Interesting. When you were talking about it and the fact that, people did not know, but in a way they knew there was something. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I really think that's the beauty behind how mindfulness pretty much shapes and deepens and strengthens our inner landscape, where it helps us to be able to, in my own words, help us to sanitize our internal sanity.
Love that. Yeah.
Because we're busy sanitizing right now. We, conscious about being, clean and wash our hands and use sanitizers. But then we're not realizing that there's a whole inner landscape that really needs some sanitizing. So I'm guessing now that that's how they pretty much could tell. There's something sane about this man's, way of being. And then it became obvious. They didn't know, but they knew there was something. And I like that story you just told, eh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that reminds me of just kind of this basic idea that I often share with people, just to normalize it, that we all have many voices inside of us. Because normally we think if you're hearing voices, that means that you're crazy or something like that. But actually, of course, all of us have, if you just think about a simple life situation where you're making a tough decision, you have a voice who's saying, yeah, go for it. And there's a voice that's saying, no, don't do it. And so I think two things that mindfulness helps us with when you talk about, and this came to mind because of what you said about sanitizing. The first is just quieting the din, the inner din a little bit, just bringing down the overall volume level. Because as we all know, if you're in a very crowded place, you can't make out any voices. Actually, you just hear kind of the bustle. And so once things start to quiet down, then you actually can start to pick out this person's voice versus that person's voice. And so maybe that's a little bit like, I don't know, reducing the overall transmission rate. I haven't thought through this analogy very well, but we'll see if it works. But then the other piece I think that's also important is it's not necessarily that we always want to be completely quiet inside, right? We need those voices, but mindfulness and particularly the emotional awareness pieces of it help us to start to distinguish which voices are which. That's my wise voice. It's trying to guide me to greater things. I need to listen to that one. Or maybe that's my voice that's coming from fear and anxiety. And it's not, this is where the non-judgmental and kindness piece of mindfulness comes in. It's not like, oh, I'm going to squash that voice and try to make it go away, but I'm going to hear it for what it is and say, okay, I hear that fear. I acknowledge you. How can I work with you? How can I move past you so that you're not limiting me to achieving my dreams, for example? And so rather than just kind of going back and forth and you don't know who to listen to, you can start to almost have this more nuanced inner life. And that's maybe a little bit like being able to tell different types of things in our environment, like you're saying with sanity. Some things we want to keep, some things we do want to clean up. So anyways, that was just a thought that was prompted by you. I love that inner sanitization.
Love the feedback on that one. So I think I'd like to ask you this question about what we represent, because like I indicated, African Institute of the Mind is focused on helping us mind our minds, one mind at a time. So if you were to respond, what does the phrase mind our minds from our mission statement at the African Institute of the Mind, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful mission statement and actually parallels very closely how I often talk to people about mindfulness. Because I think people often think like, okay, mindfulness means you have to sit down, close your eyes and watch your breath. Your legs have to be crossed, et cetera, et cetera. And I say, no, that's just one form of it. And really that's just, someone can look like that and actually not be practicing mindfulness at all, because mindfulness happens in here, in here. And the phrase that I often use, which is quite closely connected, is paying attention to your attention.
Wow.
Right? You see a very similar, it's almost the same, exactly the same. And the way I explain this, and I think this could apply to minding your mind as well, is this idea that our attention, where our conscious energy is going, it's always going somewhere, right? As long as we're awake. Actually, even if we're dreaming, we could say, our attention is going towards our dreams, but it's always going somewhere, and it's being pulled here and there. Sometimes there's external stimulus. Maybe we're watching TV, maybe our phone's buzzing, or maybe it's just internal stimulus. We're replaying thoughts in our head. We are making plans for the future. Our mental energy is always going somewhere. And mindfulness, to me, if you zoom way, way out, is all about paying more attention to where your mental energy is going. And I often also talk about really valuing our attention, our minds, as you would say, in the sense that it's like our most valuable resource. We don't always think of it this way. Often we just kind of take it for granted. But I think this is even becoming more and more true even in business settings. I don't know if you've heard of the term attention economy.
Mm.
Attention economy is this idea that, in the past, companies were competing for your dollars, right? The money in your wallet. And of course, we take good care of our wallet, right? Generally speaking, we don't just, let it go wherever. And so the attention economy is now the idea that a lot of companies, especially those that are advertising funded, if you think a lot about tech companies, for example, many tech companies, instead of competing directly for your dollars, they're competing for your eyeballs, right? They want more of your attention. And so as this idea has risen, I think it's interesting to compare this with the idea of mindfulness and paying attention to our attention, because it brings the same mindset. Okay, if someone's competing for my attention, I don't want to just be giving it away. I want to actually pay attention. One last quick analogy that may help is, treating our mind like our bodies. We know, whether we are perfect at it or not, taking care of our bodies. Like we are generally careful about what we put into our bodies, right? If we're going to enjoy something really tasty, then okay, that's fine. But at least we know, okay, I should have something healthy later.
Yes.
And so I think, again, it's another similar analogy with paying attention. Okay, I'm going to spend some time on social media. That to me is like kind of the junk food of the mind. That's okay. You don't have to cut that out necessarily. That can be a good thing. But then I'm going to spend some time, maybe being more quiet, not being so stimulated, maybe with people who are close with me, maybe outside in nature. So anyways, those are a few thoughts that come to mind.
Interesting. Thank you so much on that one. I must say that the whole, junk side was pretty much so apt. I love it. I must say thanks on that one. So my next question will be, why are we in need of a mental first aid?
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea of mental first aid is so interesting, because we're really seeing, I'm not as familiar with some of the statistics and things like that in Africa, but I know definitely in North America, people are using words like epidemic, which we normally reserve, as you well know, for physical illnesses like COVID. They're using that same word to describe the problems that we're seeing in mental health. In other words, mental health problems are becoming more and more common. They're becoming more and more rampant. Not just, I can't even delineate specific age ranges anymore. Yeah, it's the working population, it's the elderly, it's young people in school. And there's a lot that we can do to ask the question of why is it an epidemic. There's many systemic questions that we can ask and solutions we can pursue, and I'm in huge favor of that. And I believe we need to also address the wound as it's happening, help people, because these big systemic changes, let's say reducing the number, the pressure that there is to work many, many, many hours a week, or increasing access to childcare, or I don't know, you get the idea. Those systemic changes, they tend to take a long time to go through policy and those changes. In the meantime, we need to equip the people who are feeling that stress, that wounding, to use this idea of first aid. When someone has a physical wound, we know how to treat it. We need to help people develop those same skills to treat each other as well as to treat themselves with this kind of this mental epidemic.
I pretty much appreciate, how you referred to the use of the word epidemic, which typically will be used, when there are huge issues that has to do with, like COVID right now. And it's being used now around mental health. And I think it's because COVID has possibly unearthed a lot of dragons from the past that are, emerging inside people's brains and lives. And one of the things that I've had to say recently to some of our support team here is that one of my deepest dreams, aside supporting, the parliament, is to also have sessions for frontline workers. Because the medical professionals, the average doctor, nurse, a paramedic, and all these people who before COVID were seeing lesser number of deaths and cases, now see much more than that. Definitely to have an impact on their mind and their brain and their health in ways that we possibly have not thought about.
Absolutely.
Let's talk, if you may, and I'd appreciate if you just help us see from your professional lenses, where you basically unpack for us how have you seen mindfulness-based practices used at your organization there at Microsoft?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, first of all, just this idea that mental health is important and is something that a company should care about on behalf of its workers, should provide resources around, should elevate to the level of discourse, if you know what I mean. I mean, that's a big step just to talk about it. So, for example, we have, this is actually a country-wide thing. I don't know if it's worldwide or not, but May Mental Health Month. I'm not sure if that's in Africa as well. So this is something, as an example, where Microsoft recognizes that, it organizes events, it brings in special speakers, et cetera, to help, again, recognize that this is important. This is something that the organization cares about. To give you kind of another kind of just macro view of this, in organizations in kind of, again, the North American world, mental health is, as a result of COVID, it's rising to the top as the number one issue that human resources, consultants, analysts, people like Gartner and these kind of big companies that look at the industry are saying, this is the number one priority for you as a people division, as a human resources division, to help your organizations get better at, to support your employees around. And so in many ways, I feel like, first of all, it's great. We've made a lot of progress. And because this is still relatively new, I mean, it's maybe been in the background. If you had a very acute case or you really had extreme needs, you could get some help. But to actually to raise it to the point where executives are talking about it, for example, normalizing it, I believe we're still very much in kind of the birth infancy phase of where this is going to go eventually. So now, within that broader context, which I think includes things like counseling resources, things like better access to childcare or to time off if you're feeling unwell. I think mindfulness then becomes a piece of that overall solution, if I can call it that. I'm careful to say, like, mindfulness is not the solution to every mental health problem. It is a part, it is a very important part of, I would say, a suite of tools, and in particular as a proactive set of tools for people who maybe are starting to feel a little out of sorts. They're starting to feel more stressed. They know they need something. They're not quite at the point where it's kind of broken loose. Then I think it's great to build these skills, these practice inwardly, because then it's like, to me, it's a little bit like developing some protection. Back to the first aid, it's kind of like having a strong immune system, right? And so it doesn't mean that you won't get sick. There's no guarantees in this game. But it can, on the flip side, it's very real. You can feel, I think, I'm sure you would say the same, you can feel your ability to be more resilient. This is a word that we use often here, where you're able to go into that same stressful situation, because unfortunately the stress doesn't seem to go away, like the stressful situation. But then we start to realize, okay, what's stressful, and maybe I'll take a slight detour here to just talk about the actual physical manifestation of stress.
Okay.
And so the way I define stress is to first talk about the stress response. And what the stress response is, sometimes we call it the fight or flight response. It's actually a physical set of reactions called the HPA axis. It's a series of, starting in the amygdala, and then we move through a series of hormones and so forth, and eventually cortisol gets released into our systems. Our heart rate increases, our hands get sweaty, all of the things we know well. So that physical reaction is triggered by a mental reaction. There's actually a mental step of aversion, which basically means that something happens that we don't like. We're like, we get a deadline at work that's like, no, I need more time for that. There's this feeling of, no, I don't want that. And if we check, actually, that things are happening that we don't like all the time.
Indeed.
And so what happens with stress is that our stress response is not a bad thing. We actually need it in our bodies. It's important, to have that burst of adrenaline at times. The problem that we've gotten into is that our bodies are in a stressed state more than they were designed to be. And so what we need to learn to do is to, when we are stressed, to be able to turn the volume down, again, back to that idea of quieting the voices, to actually bring our bodies back into a state of the parasympathetic nervous system, where we're in a more calm state. And so this is one thing that mindfulness can help with. The other thing it can do, and back to the resilience topic that kind of got me on this tangent, is it can help us to actually trigger that whole chain reaction less frequently. Because if we step into a situation, maybe let's say a year ago, this would have really stressed us out. A year later, we've been meditating every day. Again, there's no guarantees, but I think we've all had the experience where it's like, oh, wow, like this person that normally bothers me, they don't have the same power over me, or this deadline. Oh, it's okay, I'll handle it. It's not a big deal. And so we actually avert the whole system. We don't even kick off the stress system as frequently as we do. And to me, this is an essential piece of building resilience. And so just one last thought is that through doing this, we actually become of better service to others. Because I think that's what motivates, you mentioned the doctors, nurses, they're doing amazing work, and they're of course in service to others, and they have only so much capacity before they burn out or they have their own issues. And so I think through some of these practices, one of the things that I think keeps me going is this idea that, through training myself in this way, through putting these into practice, that I can actually help others more. It's not just about me and being less stressed. I mean, that's nice, but it actually increases my ability to give to others and to be of service.
Thank you. I want to just ask you the next question. How do you see the practice of coaching fitting in with mindfulness in organizations?
Yeah, I actually think they have quite a close connection. And I know you have a lot of background in coaching. And so I'd actually love to hear your answer to this as well, if we can. But I would say I have some experience in coaching. I've done some training, some coaching, nowhere near the level that you have. But to me, I love it because coaching is becoming a very accepted and promoted practice within organizations. And the way I talk about it, at least, is this idea that, especially as a leader, rather than feeling like you have to always have the answer, that you need to tell people what to do, coaching is a lot about slowing down, spending more time listening, and asking really great questions so that the person who has the problem actually is able to come up with a solution themselves. And so at the surface, it seems like a separate practice, but then when I look at what actually makes a very effective coach, you're actually having to practice a lot of empathy. In particular, listening. I mean, listening is a surface, but I think empathy supports true listening. And in order to be empathetic, actually, the research shows that you actually need strong self-awareness. In other words, in order to be able to understand someone else's emotions that are being communicated non-verbally, of course, we first need to be able to understand our own, that makes sense. And the research is showing this through mirror neurons and so forth. And so I think, again, just to be able to listen well, to quiet our own voices, to practice empathy, these are all essential, almost foundational skills in my mind to be a really effective coach.
Indeed. And thanks for the very kind words that you shared about, I have experience in coaching. And you put it so aptly, because one of the interesting things that I tend to do is I begin my coaching psychology engagement with a listening session. And that pretty much helps me to be able to, approach the meeting, the contact conversation with an empty glass kind of paradigm, where I'm not taking, my own thinking, my thoughts, my experience in coaching to the client, because that could make me stand in the way of, having a very successful coaching psychology or executive coaching engagement. So thank you. And you really put it in very apt words. And I do appreciate that. Right. So let me just ask you one or two more questions, and sure. Then we will begin to wrap up this time with you. What would you want others to know about mindfulness that is perhaps not popularly known?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. The first one I touched on briefly is this idea of paying attention to your attention, but more practically, I would say, as I said earlier, that it does not have to look like what you see in the magazines or what you normally think of someone sitting with their eyes closed, legs crossed, etc. To me, mindfulness is something that you can engage in any time of the day, no matter what you're doing, because again, it's as simple as paying attention to your attention. So some examples that I give is when you're in conversation with someone, a close friend, a colleague, a loved one, what does it mean to really, back to coaching, actually, not that we coach our loved ones, but there are skills that we practice in terms of, what does it mean to actually stop thinking about my work problems or not pick up my phone while I'm spending that time with them? It's like I forget who said it, but someone said, the greatest gift that we can give someone is our attention. In other words, when we're with someone, to be mindful means to just be fully with them, to really listen to what they're saying to us, to engage with them fully. Or it might mean, as we're walking outside, to really just pay attention to the beauty around us, maybe the birds, the animals, to the feeling of our feet on the ground. And so I can go on and on, but I think it's this idea of getting creative, because often we don't have time to put another thing on our list. Of course, I encourage, if you have the capacity and interest, to develop a seated meditation practice, because that's kind of like your concentrated training time.
Right.
But I also say, if that's not working, and actually if you do have a seated practice, all the more reason to find ways elsewhere in your life to practice, because ultimately, even if we spend 10 or 15 minutes out of our 24 hours, we need to support it through the rest of our life. So I think that's the first thing, is just this idea that it's a very flexible practice. It can work in a way and benefit you in your own life situation. The second one I would say is to, especially as you get further down this road, and maybe take care of some of the obvious first aid needs that you have, is that mindfulness can cultivate many qualities and aspects of ourselves that it isn't as popularly known for. So I think it's very well known for kind of stress relief and well-being, which is very great and important. However, I think it also is instrumental in aspects like empathy, as I mentioned earlier, or even creativity, which is something that is not as well known for, or finding our purpose. Anyways, I won't go into all of these, but just to know that there's a lot there. On the topic of creativity, as an example, there's research that has come out that shows that part of what brings us into a really creative state, what gives us those insights, those kind of aha moments, is actually to engage other parts of our brain, not our left brain kind of logical thinking, but actually to have time away to develop what's called a spacious awareness, to have some positive affect, to be to have a reduced stimulus. So these are all things we cultivate in meditation. And so this is why, you may have seen this or heard this or had this experience where people go on retreat. They'll go away on meditation and they come back to work and they have amazing ideas, or while they're on retreat, they have amazing ideas. And so this is all being now backed by neuroscience. And so, yeah, the second thing is just kind of this idea that once you start to reap some of the stress and well-being benefits, there is more depending on what's important to you to explore.
While you were talking about the creative juices and creative side of our being emerging from a mindful lifestyle, it suddenly came to me last year during the heat of COVID here. One of the insurance companies, and they're called Discovery Health here in South Africa, they hired me to have group mindful coaching at their National Top Performers Award. Now, when I was selected, one of the things I found out was that they were wondering why they should hire me. So they asked the person who was representing the committee to ask me to give them 5 reasons why they should actually hire me. And then they made a footnote. Remember, you're not even listed on our list of suppliers. So you need to help us understand why we should hire you. And one of the things I highlighted on top of my reasons was that this session has actually shown igniting creativeness within people. And I think that struck a chord, because here is an event that was going to focus on the top performers in the company. So we might as well just try this out. And I must say, it came to my mind primarily because I really have come to realize that I think sometimes we play down how our minds open up to creative juices just by making the space to be mindful, and a whole lot of things that could emerge. And from, you know, this journey of this stuff that I do, one of the things I said to myself, if I keep getting no's, I will definitely keep, you know, writing and asking my assistant, let's keep writing. I mean, because one way by which we can get many more people to listen is if someone who works or represents a reputable brand shares their insights about it. It will come like a spotlight or a searchlight to help them realize, wait, if they are taking this serious, I think I need to be looking at this more closely. And I thought I just mentioned that as also an additional way of saying I'm deeply grateful as we go to the last question.
Sure.
So what would you say will be your call to action? Do you have, you know, some call to action that you will say, okay, for those who are already practicing and seeing benefits, what call to action do you have?
Yeah, I think, you know, for those who are practicing and seeing benefits, I think my call to action would be to share your experience with others. Because as I said, I spent many years practicing secretly when I could have, frankly, been more courageous and talked about my experiences and maybe helped others more along the way. And so just acknowledging, of course, we shouldn't push ourselves faster than we are truly ready, but at the same time to give ourselves that encouragement to know that if we speak about our experiences, if we share, if we even, you know, maybe recommend an app, a talk, a book, something that inspired us along our journey, that by doing so, we create the space for others to follow in our footsteps, to say, oh, wow, maybe I should check that out. Oh, wow, it's not just me that struggles with these things. And so in some ways, moving from that student to kind of sharing, you know, you don't have to become a teacher, but in a sense, even if you just talk about your own experience, you are teaching and you're helping others. And then, of course, for people who are just curious or maybe unsure, to explore, I'm sure you have some amazing resources through your organization. There's so much out there, from apps to groups in the community to books, and to really find something that works for you. Again, back to the theme of it doesn't have to look a certain way. It's a very flexible set of practices, and just to explore and to prioritize taking care of your mental health, your mental first aid.
All right. Well, Charles, this is where I'd like to end this. But I'd like to one more time, on behalf of the African Institute of the Mind, and today being Africa Day, a deep gratitude to you for your time, and for also supporting us, you know, with this insight that you have shared. In the days and weeks and months ahead, we will be in touch with you and share with you some of the progress we're making, as we hope that when we call on you again, you'll be able to support us with your time. And who knows, maybe in the near future, after COVID is over, maybe you'll be able to, give some of your time to be in South Africa and maybe speak at one of our future Festival of Stress. Thank you so much, Charles Morris. And from all of us here in Africa, from South Africa and across the continent, we deeply appreciate your time and we wish you the very best in the days, months, weeks, and years ahead. I usually like to say to people, please continue to take charge and don't just take care.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you so much, Joshua. This is a real pleasure, and happy Africa Day to everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right. So I really want to begin to close, and I don't know if there are a few questions or comments, or if anyone who is on the call has any question, and if you do and it's not directed to me, of course, we will gladly share them with Charles Morris. But I'd like to just, maybe just take a moment to express our gratitude to our colleagues and friends who have chimed in from across Africa. I hope it's been insightful for you. Maybe we should just close with a few thoughts and comments. Colin, Fred, I see one or two persons. Questions, yes. Comments, or you can share something that stood out for you in Charles's presentation.
I think what stood out for me was the importance of first aid. And, just as much as we have first aid for a broken toe, we need to have first aid for our mental wellness, and to just normalize that. And also how important it is for workplaces, for organizations to now prioritize that. So as much as we've got the first aid kit in the corner, we need to make sure that the first aid kit not only includes bandages. Yeah.
Indeed. Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Colin, for that one. So I think this is where we will draw the curtain. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude one more time to everyone for joining. But I also want to say that it's very special that every one of us, in some way or the other, spending some time to look after ourselves. I think many times we basically, so we sometimes just miss out on some of the opportunities that focusing on our well-being can bring when we don't. I know many people who are not expecting to have, contracted COVID. They possibly were like, no, I'm very strong, I can't have COVID. And then they're surprised. Or you hear of someone who's passed on, and you have, it brings you into that place of being more aware of the need to look after yourself. And I'd like to close with that and ask that we please continue to please be safe across the continent while you're sanitizing your hands and wearing face masks and doing all the other protocols that are required. Remember some of the things that Charles shared about the need for us to look after ourselves, as our inner landscape is also as important as the external that we're giving focus to. Thank you, everyone, one more time. And I wish you the very best into the month of July. Again, July, the 25th is the last Sunday of the month. And that's when we will have the next edition of Mind Your Mind Masterclass. It is Mandela Month in South Africa. So we have some very exciting news that we're going to bring up, and hopefully it will be a great time. If you're able to join us virtually, you can join us tomorrow. We have a school activation in Kempton Park to basically support some teachers around this time from a mental health perspective. From all of us at African Institute of the Mind, this is me expressing our gratitude one more time, and I wish you the very best. Bye for now.